I'm John Travis in Novato, California on May Day 2020, talking to Patrick Hanaway in Asheville, North Carolina. Did I say it right? Asheville, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And we have not met before that I know of. You might have been at the Seattle meeting in 1990. I don't know. That was my
Oh,
last AHMA meeting. But
no, I was not there.
I'm catching up on all the younger docs that came along after the old founders of Alice and Norm and Everts started the organization, and I dropped out fairly quickly because I couldn't afford the dues, given that wellness wasn't very lucrative. And so a lot has happened in the meantime, and you're a key player in that. So I wanted to get your story and find out who you are and why, and where you were born, grew up, what led you into medicine, and particularly holistic medicine. So let's
Sure,
start with that.
sure. Well, that's the long arc of the story. First, I want to say, Jack, thank you so much for putting this series together and for bringing the many different voices. We have all been through various stages of this, and as I believe it was Newton who said, we can see far because we stand on the shoulders of giants, and the opportunity to be able to have had relationships and connections with some of the all-stars, some of the people who began this in the first place. And while I don't know Alice and Norm very well, I've met them, have deep appreciation for what they do. I just want to acknowledge the recent passing of our friend Bob Anderson.
Yeah.
Bob, I work closely with him in the development of and working with the American board of holistic medicine, and we'll get to that part of the story. But then many others since that time, including Rob Ivker and Scott Shannon and a host of others who I'm sure you have talked to or will be talking to. So I want to, you asked me about my story. My story is I'm from the upper Midwest. I grew up in Wisconsin. I was born there, born in Madison and raised in a little town called De Pere, right outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin. A town of, when I was growing up, about 7,000 people. And of curious historical note, the first village, birthplace, founded by Marquette and Joliet in 1671 as they were going through the Great Northwest Passage, trying to find the way to the Pacific Ocean. And they stopped there on the banks of the Fox River, where they saw some rapids and they needed to stop, and it was called Rapide des Pères, and name is De Pere. And that's where I grew up. And I'm one of those curious kids who my father was a public interest lawyer and a district attorney, and my mother was a nurse and then taught nursing. And I wanted to be a doctor from the time I was as long as I can remember. I remember being 5 years old and getting a microscope, and that's what I want to do. And so I went to college at the University of Wisconsin, and graduated from there. And in time, all of a sudden, I questioned: Do I really want to be a doctor? I got accepted to medical school, and I took a couple years off, and then decided, yeah, that really is what I want to do. I was very interested in public policy and how we can help change the health of the people. And when I got to medical school, I went to medical school at Washington University. Started there in 1983. I was struck because I thought I was going to be learning about how to help people be well and healthy, and
Surprise.
that wasn't what was happening in medical school. I had studied biochemistry and I was really interested in biochemistry from the standpoint of, like, what you're talking about is proteins, fats, and carbs. You're talking about food and all the micronutrients and together. We talk about food, and they looked at me like I in my head. It's like, no, we're talking about biochemistry. I was like, well, this is the food, and so early on in medical school, we started up a nutrition course, a lunch and learn nutrition series, and we got a little bit of money, and we went and we bought food at the food co-op, and we gave it to the medical students at lunchtime, fruits and vegetables to help them to think about food, and that was sort of the beginning. And very early, I became involved with the American Medical Student Association, and met our, a mutual friend, Bill Manahan. He was, he's in Minnesota, and he was, teaching medical students about a bigger view, and met people like Jim Gordon, who started the Center for Mind Body Medicine, and Patch Adams, and time with these people learning, well, there's a bigger view of what's going on. And I felt like, wow, this is something that is really where my heart feels pulled to. And that was, that was the view coming out of medical school. I managed to have an opportunity to learn from healers of traditional Chinese medicine, and learning that, and learning hands-on healing with chiropractic and osteopathic medicine, and learning about nutrition while I was in medical school. Kind of look back, I'm not quite sure how I did that, but it was just, I was really interested in the many different aspects of healing. And I had actually, in my last year of medical school, I did some work in the nutrition division at the CDC, thinking, well, maybe this is how we do clinical prevention and how we work in this way. But it was really more epidemiologically interested in getting some foundations in research and working in that venue. It was great. And then I spent time working for the head of the state health department in the state of Missouri, Bob Harmon, for a year. And we were focused on how to be able to allocate resources to give better prenatal care, and focused on public health nursing. And yet what I learned there was that in order to be a doctor, I needed to see people. I didn't want to be at a desk and be working with administrators of clinics. I wanted to be seeing people, because that's where healing happens, and that's what helps, my heart to feel like I'm connecting. So I became a family doctor, and trained at the University of New Mexico, and while I was there, I got to befriend an incredible woman, one of the leaders now in the field, if you will, Tarone Dog. Tarone was a herbalist, a self-taught herbalist, but brilliant. She went on to become a doctor, and has been, a big teacher of many, many people around both medical herbalism, but also a big picture view. And she's a wonderful healer and teacher. And so I just kind of kept learning things along the way. I spent time with Marty Rossman and David Bressler, learning about guided imagery, and finding different tools to put in my toolkit. Going from osteopathy to learning craniosacral therapy. And, so I'm one of those people who just, like, I had a lot of tools in my tool bag, and wasn't really sure how to use them. But I needed to feel confident in my capacity as a doctor, and ended up working first in the Albuquerque Indian Hospital a year after my residency training, and then where I worked in the Isleta and Jemez Pueblos, really just being a regular family doc. And then my wife and I moved to Western Alaska, and we lived on the Bering Sea in Bethel, Alaska, with the Yupika Eskimo people for a couple of years. And again, being in a setting where we had 10 doctors in a hospital. We did everything: OB, surgery, and we had a small ICU and emergency room, and we had 10 doctors treating 22,000 people in an area as big as Oregon. And that was I learned a lot, but I also learned from the elders there about their old ways of healing, and about the use of foods and herbs, and the ways in which they connected. And that's been a sub theme in my career was being able to sit at the feet of many Native elders and be able to hear their view of what healing was and how we need to listen. And so those are kind of the formative things that occurred. I went back and taught at the University of New Mexico in the family medicine department, and running a small clinic out in rurally, teaching medical students and residents. But we wanted to, my wife and I, who's also a physician, Dr. Lisa Lichtig, we wanted to start a practice that would be a place where we could do whatever we wanted and be able to bring forth these ideas of taking time and sitting with people and listening to their stories, being able to gather the information and be able to use, whether it's nutrition or helping them to deal with the stresses in their life, working with herbs, working with hands-on healing, energetic healing, referring to, other colleagues for those patients who weren't getting better. I'll speak about that in just a moment. And so we moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and we started a practice in this house that you see me sitting in, 100 years old, called Family to Family. From our family, myself, my wife Lisa, our two then small sons, and two other families to helping them out. Lisa delivered babies for the first 15 years in the practice, and so we would have a constant supply of small kids and families, as well as people with complex chronic disease and those who were dying. And so it was a real cradle to grave kind of practice, and we've done that, bringing many different tools that we have in our toolkit. And I could, at that point in time, I guess I'll just go on. I began to learn more about an arena, an area that was being dubbed functional medicine at the time. Mm-hmm. And I had read in medical school a book of Jeff Bland's talking about nutritional biochemistry and wellness. And I'd always connected to that. And as it happened, there was a laboratory here in Asheville, North Carolina, then called Great Smokies Diagnostic Lab. And I began to talk to the people there and say, what is it that you do and how do you measure things? And I'd heard about them, little personal side note, I'd heard about them about 5 years before, in 1991, when I was traveling and we helped set up a clinic in a monastery, in a Tibetan monastery in Sikkim in northern India. And during that time, I got amoebic dysentery pretty badly. And when I came back, a colleague of mine said, "Oh, you should check out this lab that does stool testing." And I did, and it was this lab in Asheville, North Carolina. Who would know that 5 years later I would be living in Asheville, and then 5 years after that I would become the medical director of that laboratory. And so we never know how our paths in life are going to unfold. And so I began to talk with them and work with them, and help to teach, do some research, and over time they asked me to become more engaged in helping to play a leadership role in that. And as I did that, I began to have opportunities. I sat for the boards, the American Board of Holistic Medicine. I hadn't been able to do it the first year, but I did it the second year, and I spoke with Rob Ifker, and Rob said, "You have a pretty interesting view. Would you be interested in teaching some about what you're doing?" And I said, "Sure." And after I did that the first time, they said, Rob asked me if I would be interested in being on the board, the American Board of Holistic Medicine. And I said, sure. And through that, I began to get to know Rob and Scott and Bob Anderson and Lev Linkner and, the many others, Alan Warshawski, lots of people who had been involved in holistic medicine for a long period of time, and became a part of a group of how do we begin to transform this and make this more a part of accepted in the broader realm of things. And so I worked on that board for 12 years, serving on the executive committee and as president, and had an incredible opportunity to learn and grow, and taking it through some difficult times. Not unlike AHMA, we were unsure at one point. Can we keep doing this? And yet we connected with university with Scripps and Mimi Guarneri, and she helped to support that. And Lee Lipsenthal was instrumental in the process of transformation. And these are deep friendships that have and that have influenced my life. And Scott Shannon and I are, very, very close friends. And being able to be a part of this community, this tribe, is one that's continued to support me through now work in functional medicine. In 2014, I finished working in the lab, and they asked me to, the Institute for Functional Medicine asked me to help lead a new center for functional medicine that was being started at the Cleveland Clinic. And I did that, thought that it was going to be a part-time job for a year to get it going. It ended up being pretty much a full-time job for about 3.5, 4 years. But we were able to grow from, a very small footprint to being able to develop a center with, 17 feet, 8 doctors, 3 mid-levels, 6 nutritionists, and being able to see thousands and thousands of people. And part of that work was also setting up the research framework that was able to be published in JAMA network last October, showing that when you do care, in this case, functional medicine, where you take time and you listen to people's stories and you treat them as a whole person, that they actually do better than a matched cohort of other patients seeing family medicine doctors at the Cleveland Clinic. So our comparison group was a pretty high bar, and we were able to show that it does better. Our future studies, I still work with them as a collaborator on research, and future studies are looking at, and we'll be talking about also save money, which goes back to when I was in medical school and I wanted to do research on clinical prevention, and being able to demonstrate what just seemed intuitively obvious. When you listen to people and you care for them and you take time with them and you meet them where you're at and you give them the basics of what they need of holistic medicine, nutrition, care, love, light, that they do better. And
So
it costs
opposite.
less. And it costs less. So here we are now, in 2020, and actually see what's happening with this whole, COVID-19 virus, a product of the natural world that humans are in fear of and isolating rather than connect. That what we're seeing is that the virus is illustrating, or it's sort of shining a light on where the cracks in our system are, and that the system, what we want to do is we want to work to care for people with complex chronic diseases, to give them the foundational tools that are going to help them to be better and decrease their risk of getting super sick or dying from this virus. And that's where we need to turn our focus to. And that's what I'm hoping that, many of my friends and colleagues and others that I don't yet know will take this as an opportunity, not as a crisis, but as an opportunity to change how we're looking at healing, and looking at healing instead of just medicine.
Mm. Wow. What a story.
Yeah, there's more elements to it, but that's, thanks for giving me the chance to just download.
So are you both still seeing families there at the house office?
Yeah, so we don't live here. This is an old
Oh,
old home. We have our home out in the country. We never bought this. This is just a place that we've been able to be at. But yeah, this is, I mean, you can see my office here. Like there's the exam table, and there we see the spine in the corner. We've got, paintings from the Huichol people, the Huiratica people in the central highlands or in the Sierra Madres in Mexico, where I was initiated as a traditional healer about 10 years ago, after 10 years of work and pilgrimage with them on an annual basis. And it's just all the aspects of healing. They're all a part of the whole.
mm-hmm. Well, how are you managing with the isolation? Are you doing telemedicine with your?
Yeah. So telemedicine is with our patients right now. Some days I'll come into the office as I am today and do it from here. Some days we'll do it from home, set up a little home office there. But very much kind of bare bones. Fortunately, we're focused on connecting with people, and so it's not a procedure-based practice. It's one that's really about listening to people, and I love it. Even just as we sit here, and I can look at you, and I can tell my story, and you can look at me, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same as being in person, but it is better than being on the phone, and is better than not seeing someone. And I think that you talked about isolation. I think we're actually missing some of the point in this. Like I understand from a transmission standpoint of decreasing the transmission of the virus, but being able to actually connect with people is an important part of who we are as human beings. And we need to connect to ourselves, to each other, into the natural world. Now the beauty of this is that we're getting more chance to connect with the natural world. Many more people are outside and connecting and doing that. And that's a great shift. That's a great change.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us are using the time to connect to ourselves in a deeper way and be able to do introspection and reflect. Although many people having the distractions of their life stripped away, work or restaurants or food or gatherings or sports, and they don't have that anymore, are not responding so well. They're responding from more of an emotionally reactive place, and how do we as a community help to hold them and bring them back? And that's the piece in it that I think is missing right now. And it's going to be fascinating as we go forward to how do we move forward and begin to reconnect and re-engage? And I don't know the answer, but I know that it's critically important. As Bob Anderson, when he was writing the 10 things of the 10 rules of holistic medicine, really boiled it down to one, and that is that unconditional love is the ultimate medicine. It's the ultimate healer.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. And as we said within our AHMA group for a long time, I still have coffee cups, hugs heal. Like that connection is important. Let's not forget that and find ways to be able to connect in a deep and meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Given the novel situation that viewers, down the line may not be aware of, we're right in the midst of this radical shift in our culture of isolating and so forth. What have you noticed with your patients? Any particular new observations with this radical shift in how you relate to them? How can you say more about that?
Yeah. There's a couple of them, and Jack, I think that much of this will be forgotten, and yet Um, there will be no of that time of the pandemic, um, and it will be. I think it is a pivot point. You know, it's maybe one of the major moments in our lives. You know, in my father's generation, it was World War II. You know, there's something that's going to be a reference point for the future. And so I'm seeing a couple different things. I mentioned already that, you know, some of the patients, you know, are not reacting well, and there's a lot of fear, and there's an emotional reactivity, sort of an activation of old patterns in the limbic system, where they're not doing well. And I've heard in the past couple of days that you know, beer sales and wine sales are skyrocketing, which means, you know, people are trying to forget. You know, they're trying to avoid. They're pulling away from what are they really feeling, and so has been for a long time, but continues to be, you know, how do we help people connect to their feelings, to their emotions, to what's going on, and be able to be present with that and allow that as part of the process of healing to unfold. Then I find that there are other patients who are using their concerns to say, I'm going to do whatever I can to take care of myself. The diabetic patients, it's interesting, you know, they're considered to be amongst the one of the highest risks, and yet they're like more motivated in being able to work with their diet and exercise and monitoring their blood sugars and making sure that they're doing what they can to decrease the risk of getting this illness of the SARS-CoV-2 virus infection. And I find that fascinating because it's sort of, we see people's true character begin to emerge. And for some of them, that character is rising up and shining and showing. For some of them, they're moving more deeply into fear. And so how do we help them? How do we deal with that energy and work with them to be present with the fears of themselves, the fears of the natural world, the fears of the social world? And so it's getting people to drop into that space and see what it is that needs to be done. This is more important than taking an herb or a supplement to try to avoid the infection, but rather the deeper work that has to be done. So, you know, I've not been able to see people personally to do the energetic healing work that I've learned from the Wicca people in the Sierra Madres. And I look forward to being able to gather with people around the fire again in the future. So that's another aspect of, you know, of the healing work that I do, and also working as a firekeeper to gather people around the fire. We're doing virtual fires. We had a men's fire last night with you know, a camera pointed on the fire, and then us gathering around in a virtual circle to be able to share what's going on, which is a useful thing, but it's not a substitute. It's an addition to when we meet in the future in person around the fire. So I think that from to answer your question, coming back to it, you know, it's finding ways to help people to connect and providing tools and perspectives of helping them to connect with what's going on inside themselves and in their social bubble or pod or whatever they're calling their arrangement of working to deepen those relationships. I can say that my two sons, who are 28 and 26, are now home, and you know, we're becoming a family that, you know, that is an adult family of how we relate together, and it's beautiful. You know, so there's, you know, time in the morning where my wife and I have tea, and then, you know, we do our work during the day, some of it inside, some of it outside, some of it on the land, some of it with gardens. And then we try to go on a hike each day, walking along the river where we live. And then at 6 o'clock we gather and we start to prepare dinner. all which is or whoever can make it at that time. And so it's about reconnecting to those who are in your lives and being present with them and learning to be able to deepen those connections and relationships. And that's what I work with my patients on, to say, these are the fundamental steps of how to be able to do that. And it's a fascinating journey.
About 10 or 15 years ago, I realized I could summarize my work with 6 words of the currency of wellness is connection. And you're certainly validating that. I'm curious, the fire circle that you described, is that with patients or with a family friend?
No, we do that. We do that as a community of people who gather. Although I also will invite patients, not only in community, but in one-on-one to fire. We find, fire is something, before in Africa, they say before there was TV, there was fire. That's where we would gather as people, as communities, in that way for thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, as a means of being able to learn and share what's been going on in our lives. So it's just remembering that and connecting again to that work.
So do you have a larger community around you there in Asheville?
Yeah, we have. Well, we've connected to people. Obviously, we all have sort of many different tribes and many different communities that we connect to. So there's there's the healers that we connect to, but there's also patients who we connect to, and then there's others, who are seeking, like in this way, to slow to drop in. I have a bumper sticker on my 30-year-old pickup truck. It says, for fast acting relief, try slowing down. And and it's a way of being able to create a context. And so we do men's fires every month, women's fires every month, community fires, where we'll have anywhere from 15 to 50 people come and be present with each other around fire. Of course, it hasn't been happening for the past couple of months. We've been doing it virtually. And that's been an interesting journey, because initially we thought, well, really, is anything going to happen there? And yet we find that when we gather and sit in presence with each other, that we drop in incredible ways to be able to share what's going on in our lives, the joy, the suffering, and to be witnessed by others. Not to have any fix it, or there's not a therapy session, but really just a circle, a talking circle that allows for deep listening, to be heard, and reflection. And doing that in the presence of fire also seems to act as an accelerator of that process for some unknown reason, but it must be hardwired into us as human beings.
Yeah. This is reminding me of a group that I helped start 35 years ago. We called Metadox, which our usual format was to meet 3 days, twice a year, often in the East Coast. Most of them around Charlottesville, Virginia. But now we've switched to Zoom meetings weekly, and now every other week. People getting Zoomed out, but yeah, it's among a lot of, well, we consider ourselves between Orthodox and Paradox, so we were Metadox. And
I like that.
But yeah, that kind of community is so important. Well, this has been quite a story. Are there any other things you'd like to pass on to future generations? Closing comments?
Well, I mentioned something as we started our practice and working with other practitioners, and I want to share a couple of ideas that are bigger view perspectives as you talk about, between Orthodox and Paradox. And that is, in meeting with a group of other acupuncturists, golfer, herbalist, massage therapist, or a couple of acupuncturists, we said, well, we all have patients who aren't getting better from what we're doing. Maybe it would be great to be able to have sort of a shared pool and take a person who we're working with who we're not able to help for whatever reason, or they're not getting better, and have them come into the group and have them see different practitioners and be able to do that now. And then we'll gather and share that information of what we've learned. And when we said we gathered, we're like, well, should the person be there? And it's like, well, yeah, the person should be there, and, they're a point in the circle of the conversation and learning from each of us. And we did this, we wanted to do it, we couldn't figure out a business model for it. We said, well, we're working and learning from this. So we'll do this, for free with our time. And for the people, the patients, if you will, we're going to have them each time they see one of us, donate food to the local food co-op. And so there's some exchange that's going on. They're not getting it all for free. But one of the things that we found was that when we were reflecting on what was happening for an individual patient, that there may be a view that 3 of the practitioners had that 2 of the practitioners didn't have. And that quite often, that when, like, let's say for myself, if there was something that I wasn't seeing in that patient, it was quite provocative in that it was reflective of something I wasn't seeing in myself. And so we began to use this model of the diamond, reflecting the different facets. And in order to see all the facets of the diamond of any individual, well, we need multiple people. We need a community. We need a group to be able to work and help support that person. And we've tried to do that in our practice, but where I wanted to take that sort of diamond model is that, I've also, had the opportunity to, maybe it's just out of curiosity, maybe it's my own attention deficit disorder. But when I was in medical school, I kept asking the question, well, how are all these different kinds of medicine the same? Not unlike Selye looked at stress by how responses are different, but what is the response to stress, whether it's, hot or cold, overcrowding or isolation, overeating or starvation. He looked at what's the common thread. And I was always interested in what's the common thread in medicine. And there were some interesting things that emerged because, I began to learn Chinese medicine and Chinese pulse taking diagnosis with pressure sensory electrodes. And I thought, well, this would be great because this could be used as, it doesn't matter what kind of therapeutic, whether it's Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine or Western medicine or herbology or nutrition, it's, now we're defining a common issue. But what I found was it's not quite that simple. And that is that when someone's taking a pulse from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's very different than when they're taking a pulse from an Ayurvedic perspective. And I had a chance to learn pulse taking diagnosis from both of those perspectives. And what I found was the aha that you'll say, of course, is that the observer changes what's being observed. And that when approaching a person from a viewpoint of Ayurvedic medicine and take the pulses, they actually feel different than if I take them and I'm approaching them from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective. So it's not that easy. You can't overlay it. And yet there's something that is the synthesis. So in the 7th century in Tibet, they took what they called the rock medicine, the shamanic medicine of the Bonpo people. And they said, well, that's nice, but that's really not the whole thing. Let's gather the medicines of the world from China, from India, from Persia, from Egypt, from Rome, from West Africa, and gather these medicines together and see what's there. And they created Tibetan medicine, which is based upon the five elements and based upon the mandala with the four sides in the middle, and which is deeply connected. And they've been teaching that and doing that now for 1,300 years. And my point is that we are at a time now where we have the opportunity to be able to synthesize, to learn from each other, all of the different kinds of healing that are available. And that to me, that's what holistic medicine is. It's just good medicine. How do we take those elements and be able to learn and weave them together? And that's what AHMA and AIHM and other organizations, as they grow forward, that's what we're doing. We're working to say, how do we bring these elements and be able to synthesize them together in a system that's really looking at the whole person? And we have to come back and keep looking at the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. And in functional medicine, we look at that, through a lens of various kinds of function. Function happens at the level of the person, but also at the level of the cell and at the level of our society. We all have needs to gain nutrients and assimilate, whether it's us or our culture. We all have defense and repair mechanisms, whether we call that the military, the police, or the immune system. We've got energy production methods. We've got disposal methods of waste, of detoxification. We've got transportation and communication mechanisms and infrastructure. And so finding ways to be able to organize the information so that it doesn't matter which system you're viewing it from, and it doesn't matter which therapeutic option you're taking. They're all able to fit into a lens that we can begin to understand that we're all human beings, and we all have various imbalances that are part of our gene environment interaction and how we manifest in the world. And we can learn from that. And we're at a time, again, of great opportunity to begin to move away from this rather rigid, linear, let's call it left brain based dominant hierarchy, male oriented view of medicine that's linear and about doing, and to really look at it from a holistic perspective. And that's where I feel like our great opportunities are. And I'm so glad to have a chance to be able to speak to that.
Well said. That's a great summation. Thank you. So I'll let you get on with your work, and wish you the best for many more years of contribution. So thanks again.
Thank you, Jack.
Bye.
Have a great day.